You stand in line formation Delta 847, sublevel 847 of Hive Primus Magnifica. The recycled air burns your nostrils with its cocktail of industrial lubricants, human sweat, and something else, something organic and wrong that you've learned not to think about too deeply. Your feet ache. They've been aching for the past 14 hours, ever since you took your place behind the woman with the weeping sores on her neck and the man whose cough sounds like metal grinding against bone. In your right hand, you clutch 3 corroded metal tokens. They're warm now from your grip, slick with the sweat of desperation. These tokens represent 72 hours of life, assuming the ration dispensers don't malfunction again, assuming there's actually sustenance paste left when your turn comes, assuming the administratum hasn't decided that your sector's productivity scores warrant a nutritional adjustment. The line stretches ahead of you like a river of human misery, snaking through the dimly lit corridors of the sublevel. Behind you, it continues for kilometers, a writhing mass of 200 billion souls compressed into a vertical tomb that reaches from the planet's surface to depths that haven't seen natural light in millennia. You've heard the calculation whispered in the shadows of the hab blocks. If every person in Hive Primus Magnifica lay down end to end, they would circle the planet 14 times. The woman in front of you shifts her weight from one foot to the other. The movement sends a wave through the crowd, thousands of subtle adjustments rippling outward like water disturbed by a stone. In the press of bodies, personal space is a luxury none can afford. You smell her unwashed hair, the Medikey-issued disinfectant gel that can't quite mask the scent of infection, the sharp tang of fierce sweat that everyone here produces but no one acknowledges. Your stomach contracts painfully, reminding you that you haven't eaten in 36 hours. The last meal was a thin gruel, officially designated as reconstituted protein supplement grade C. That had the consistency of wet concrete and a taste that made you wonder what kinds of waste products found their way into the recycling vats. But you ate it. You ate every drop because the alternative was joining the daily procession of bodies that the Corpse Guild collects from the lower levels. Then you hear it. A mechanical voice, artificial and emotionless, begins to echo through the vast cavern of sublevel 847. The Administratum Servitor, designation Epsilon Prime, has been the same model for as long as anyone can remember. It stands 3 meters tall, its Baroque imperial chassis decorated with skulls and purity seals, its voice projecting with the authority of the God Emperor himself. You've heard this voice every 3 days for the past 7 years, announcing the standard ration distribution protocols, sector productivity assessments, and occasional loyalty reminders. But today, something is different. Citizens of Sector 847, the servitor's voice booms, and you feel the words reverberate through your chest cavity. The ADMINISTRATUM has implemented revised nutritional protocols in accordance with Imperial Directive 7452 Omega. The crowd stirs. Revised protocols usually mean reduced portions. You've survived 3 such revisions in your lifetime, each one bringing rations closer to the biological minimum required to prevent widespread organ failure. Around you, people exchange glances heavy with resignation. This is the rhythm of Hive life, hope slowly strangled by administrative efficiency. Due to critical shortfalls in off-world agricultural imports, the servitor continues, and now there's something in its mechanical tone that sends ice through your veins. The Imperial Administration has authorized implementation of Emergency Nutrition Program Sigma Black. Sigma Black. The designation means nothing to you, but the way the crowd has gone silent, truly silent, for the first time in your memory, tells you that it should. In a population of 200 billion, absolute silence is impossible. Yet here it is, pressing down on you like a physical weight. Effective immediately, all nutritional supplements will be sourced from available local biomass reserves to ensure continued population stability. Local biomass reserves. The words hang in the recycled air like a toxin. You feel your mind trying to process their meaning, trying to find an interpretation that doesn't lead to the conclusion that's already crystallizing in your consciousness like a malignant growth. Local biomass. In a hive city where nothing grows, where every scrap of organic matter is precious beyond measure, where the only abundant resource is, all citizens will report 4 nutritional assessment and classification, beginning with SECTORS 800 through 900. Compliance is mandatory, and non-compliance will result in immediate reassignment to biomass processing facilities. The woman in front of you makes a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a scream, but something that encompasses both and reaches deeper into human despair than either could alone. It's the sound of understanding. The sound of a civilized mind confronting an uncivilized reality. Biomass processing facilities. You realize, with the cold clarity of absolute horror, that you know what those words mean. You've always known, somewhere in the part of your mind that you've trained not to examine too closely. Those daily processions of bodies collected by the Corpse Guild, where did you think they went? The meat in your protein rations that sometimes had an unusual texture, an almost familiar taste that made you gag if you thought about it too hard. What did you imagine it was? The tokens in your hand suddenly feel different, not like a ticket to survival, but like currency in a transaction you're only now beginning to understand. Around you, the crowd begins to move, not forward toward the ration dispensers, but backward, away from the servitor's announcement. People are crying now, some quietly, some with the raw, animal sounds of creatures caught in a trap. But there's nowhere to go. The exits are already sealed. Heavy blast doors that you hadn't noticed before have slid shut with the finality of tombstones. The Adeptus Arbites emerge from alcoves that seemed empty moments ago, their carapace armor gleaming under the artificial lights, shock mauls already charged and crackling with electric anticipation. Their faces are hidden behind rebreather masks, but their posture radiates the kind of professional calm that comes from long experience with desperate populations. You understand now why the silence had felt so absolute. It wasn't that 200 billion people had simultaneously fallen quiet. It was that they had all realized the same terrible truth at the same moment. The collective intake of breath as an entire civilization discovered what it had become. Nutritional assessment will begin in Processing Station Alpha, the servitor announces, its mechanical arm extending to point toward a corridor that you swear wasn't there 5 minutes ago. Citizens will proceed in orderly fashion. Resistance will be noted in individual files for future reference. The crowd begins to move again, but differently now. There's no pushing, no shoving, no desperate attempts to reach the front of the line. Instead, people move like sleepwalkers, their faces blank with shock, their movements mechanical and precise. You find yourself moving with them, your legs carrying you forward without conscious command from your brain. As you walk toward Processing Station Alpha, you pass a small child. She can't be more than 8 years old, with the pale, undernourished look common to all Hive children. She's holding her mother's hand and looking up with confused eyes that haven't yet learned to stop asking questions. "Mama," she says in a voice that cuts through the sound of shuffling feet like a knife through fabric. "Why does everyone look so sad? Are we going to get more food now?" Her mother doesn't answer, can't answer. Because how do you explain to a child that the more food she's asking about might be her neighbor from 3 habs down? How do you tell an innocent mind that the civilization she was born into has decided that some people are more valuable as ingredients than as individuals? You pass them and keep walking, because stopping won't change anything and might make things worse for all of you. But you hear the child's voice echoing in your mind, and you understand that you're witnessing something more profound than policy change or administrative restructuring. You're watching the death of innocence on a planetary scale. Ahead of you, the corridor opens into a vast chamber that looks almost medical in its sterile efficiency. Clean white walls, bright lights, examination tables arranged in neat rows. If you didn't know better, you might think you were approaching a routine health screening. the kind of mundane bureaucratic process that has defined hive life for millennia. But you do know better now. And as you cross the threshold into Processing Station Alpha, you realize that the most horrifying aspect of what's happening isn't the cannibalism itself. It's how easily it fits into the existing structures of imperial administration. How seamlessly atrocity can be integrated into bureaucracy when survival is the only remaining imperative. Behind you, you hear the child ask another question. Mama, will the nice people in white help us feel better? And you understand, with the crushing weight of absolute certainty, that in the grim darkness of the far future, even that innocent hope is about to be corrupted beyond recognition. The taste of desperation, you realize, is just the beginning. Soon, it will be replaced by tastes far worse, tastes that will redefine what it means to be human in the vertical tomb of Hive Primus Magnifica. The woman with the weeping sores stumbles slightly as you enter the processing chamber, and for a moment her eyes meet yours. In them, you see your own reflection, not just your physical image, but your shared understanding of what you've all become. Not citizens, not even prisoners. Inventory. To understand how humanity arrives at the point where cannibalism becomes policy, you must first understand the mathematics of impossibility that governs life in a hive city. Take your position at the observation deck of administrative level 12,000, one of the few places in Hive Primus Magnifica where you can actually see the scope of what you're dealing with. Below you, stretching down into darkness that seems to have no bottom, level upon level of human habitation extends like the vertebrae of some impossibly vast creature. 200 billion people. The number is so large that your mind struggles to process it. If you could count every person in the hive, spending just 1 second on each individual, it would take you over 6,000 years of continuous counting to reach the end. If every person consumed just 1 kilogram of food per day, far below the biological minimum for health, the hive would require 200 million tons of food daily. That's more biomass than most worlds produce in a year. You're standing beside Administratum Clerk Designation Tertius 9, a man whose job it is to track these numbers with the same mechanical precision that others might use to count bolts in a manufactorum. His augmetic eye whirs softly as it processes data streams from thousands of sector reports, his fingers dancing across the calculation cogitator with the practiced efficiency of 3 decades in service to the imperial bureaucracy. The calculations are quite simple, really, he says, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who has long since learned to separate emotion from arithmetic. 200 billion citizens require approximately 240 billion calories daily for basic metabolic function. Current food production capacity, 180 billion calories per day, assuming optimal harvesting conditions and zero wastage. He pauses to input new data, the soft clicking of keys providing an oddly comforting rhythm in the sterile office environment. Outside the reinforced window, you can hear the distant hum of the hive's circulation systems, the mechanical breathing of a city-sized organism struggling to maintain life functions. Of course, Tertius 9 continues, optimal conditions haven't existed for approximately 14 years. Actual current production hovers around 160 billion calories daily. The deficit compounds exponentially when you factor in storage losses, transportation delays, and administrative overhead. The deficit. He speaks of it like a minor bookkeeping error, not the slow starvation death of billions of human beings. But this is how the administratum functions, by reducing human suffering to manageable data sets, by transforming moral crises into mathematical problems that can be solved with sufficient computational power and bureaucratic will. You realize you're witnessing something profound. The precise moment when individual human lives become statistical abstractions. Tertius 9 isn't cruel or sadistic. He's simply doing his job with the thoroughness that the Imperium demands of its servants. The horror lies not in his callousness, but in his complete sincerity. He genuinely believes that reducing complex human tragedies to numerical values is the most efficient way to serve the emperor's will. The breakthrough came 18 months ago, he explains, calling up a new data stream that makes his augmetic eye glow brighter. Tech-adept biologist Gamero calculated that the average human body contains approximately 125,000 calories of usable protein, fat, and carbohydrate content. When processed efficiently, a single individual can provide nutritional support for 8 other individuals for a period of 1 solar day. 125,000 calories, 8 individuals. 1 solar day. The precision of it is what makes your stomach turn. Not just the cannibalistic implications, but the fact that someone sat down with calculation engines and nutritional charts and determined the exact caloric value of human flesh with the same methodical approach they might use to analyze grain yields or livestock productivity. Initial implementation faced significant resistance, Tertius 9 continues, seemingly unaware of your growing horror. Citizens demonstrated marked reluctance to participate in voluntary biomass contribution programs. Psychological evaluations indicated that pre-existing cultural taboos were creating inefficiencies in resource allocation. Voluntary biomass contribution programs. The euphemism is so clinical, so bureaucratically neutral, that it takes you a moment to realize he's talking about asking people to kill themselves so others can eat them. And when voluntary participation proved insufficient, the administratum did what it always does. It made the process mandatory. You leave Tertius 9 to his calculations and descend to sublevel 2847, where Hab block overseer Mordian Thane is dealing with the practical consequences of those mathematical abstractions. Thane is a different kind of imperial servant, less augmetic, more human, but perhaps more disturbing because of it. Where Tertius 9 processes horror through computational detachment, Thane has found ways to rationalize it that preserve his basic humanity while enabling systematic atrocity. You have to understand, Thane says as he leads you through the maze of corridors that constitute his domain. We're not monsters here. Every decision we make is guided by the principle of maximum survival for the greatest number of citizens. Maximum survival. The phrase has become a mantra in the Hive's middle management levels, a philosophical framework that transforms any action into a moral imperative as long as it preserves more lives than it destroys. It's a seductive logic, particularly when you're surrounded by evidence of civilization's collapse. The Hab blocks under Thane's supervision house approximately 50 million people in a space originally designed for 10 million. Families of 8 crowd into chambers built for 2. Privacy is extinct. Sanitation is a constant crisis. Violence erupts regularly over resources as minimal as a few milliliters of recycled water or a handful of protein pellets that might contain enough nutrition to extend life by a few more hours. Look at this, Thane says, stopping before a reinforced viewing port that overlooks one of the communal living areas. Below you, thousands of people exist in conditions that would have been considered inhumane for livestock in the pre-industrial era. Children with distended bellies and hollow eyes play games that consist entirely of pretending to eat imaginary food. Adults lie on makeshift bedding, their bodies slowly consuming themselves from within as malnutrition works its inexorable mathematics. Before the new nutrition protocols, Thane explains, we were losing approximately 200,000 citizens daily to starvation-related conditions. The corpses created sanitation crises that killed thousands more through disease. The psychological trauma of watching loved ones waste away was causing productivity to decline across all sectors. You notice how he still doesn't use the word cannibalism. In the vocabulary of imperial administration, the practice has been rebranded as biomass recycling, or protein reclamation, or nutritional optimization. The euphemisms aren't just bureaucratic convenience, their psychological necessity for the people who implement these policies. Direct acknowledgement of what they're actually doing would make the system impossible to sustain. The selection process is completely fair, Thane continues, his voice taking on the tone of someone who has repeated this justification so many times that he's begun to believe it himself. Productivity assessments, health evaluations, genetic viability studies, social contribution indices. Every citizen is evaluated according to the same objective criteria. Those selected for biomass contribution are making the ultimate sacrifice for the survival of their fellow imperial subjects. Fair, objective, sacrifice. The language of nobility applied to the mechanics of murder, and the most disturbing aspect is that Thane genuinely believes what he's saying. He's constructed an elaborate moral framework that allows him to sleep at night while signing death warrants for thousands of people daily. You descend further, into the depths where tech priest biologist Zaydenal oversees the practical aspects of biomass processing. Here, in the mechanical bowels of the hive, the euphemisms fall away, and you confront the industrial reality of cannibalism implemented on a planetary scale. Zaydenal is more machine than human. His original biological form has been extensively replaced with augmetic systems designed for maximum efficiency in biological analysis and resource management. When he speaks, his voice carries the metallic undertones of vox synthesis, but his words reveal an intelligence that has calculated the horror with perfect precision and found it acceptable. The human body is remarkably inefficient as a food source, he explains, his mechadendrites writhing as they interface with various monitoring systems throughout the processing facility. Significant biomass is lost to non-nutritional components, skeletal structures, nervous tissue, various organ systems that provide minimal caloric value. However, advanced processing techniques can extract usable protein from approximately 73% of total body mass. 73% efficiency. In the context of imperial resource management, that's actually quite good. The Mechanicus has spent centuries optimizing systems that waste far more raw material in the service of the machine god. From Zaydenal's perspective, cannibalism isn't an atrocity. It's an engineering challenge that his order has solved with characteristic thoroughness. Initial processing removes obvious waste products, he continues, leading you past vats and conveyor systems that you try not to examine too closely. Secondary refinement extracts usable proteins, fats, and trace minerals. Tertiary processing converts remaining organic matter into nutrient paste suitable for mass distribution. Total processing time from initial biomass, input to final nutritional product, 14 hours, 17 minutes. 14 hours, 17 minutes. From person to paste in less than a day. The efficiency is horrifying not because it's crude, but because it's so refined. The Imperium has taken one of humanity's greatest taboos and industrialized it with the same methodical precision they apply to weapons production or void ship construction. Quality control is paramount, Zaydenal adds, apparently mistaking your stunned silence for professional interest. All biomass is tested for disease, genetic anomalies, and chemical contamination. Substandard material is redirected to industrial lubricant production or fertilizer synthesis. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. The motto of imperial efficiency applied to the consumption of human flesh. And as you listen to Zaydenal describe quality control measures for processed human meat with the same clinical precision that others might use to discuss ammunition specifications, you realize that you're witnessing the death of taboo itself. The Imperium hasn't just normalized cannibalism, it's bureaucratized it, industrialized it, and integrated it so thoroughly into the machinery of governance that questioning it would be like questioning the necessity of oxygen recycling or waste heat reclamation. It's become just another aspect of hive management, as routine and unremarkable as any other administrative function. And perhaps most disturbing of all, it works. The mathematics are undeniable. Fewer people are dying of starvation now than before the implementation of nutritional optimization protocols. The system is achieving its stated goal of maximizing survival for the greatest number of citizens. The question that haunts you as you leave the processing levels is not whether the system is effective. Clearly it is. The question is what happens to a species when effectiveness becomes the only remaining moral principle, when survival justifies any action, when the distance between what we can do and what we should do disappears entirely. In the grim darkness of the far future, you're discovering that distance was the last thing that separated humanity from the monsters they fight against in the void. And now, in the name of imperial efficiency, that distance is being measured in calories per kilogram and processed in batches of 10,000. The architecture of hunger, you realize, is also the architecture of hell, and it's being constructed with the methodical precision that makes the Imperium the dominant force in a galaxy full of horrors. You are Marcus Chen-Voss, Maintenance Technician Grade 7, Sector 847, and you've just received a data slate that will determine whether your 8-year-old daughter lives to see her 9th birthday. The message arrived via servoskull at 8:47 hours, Imperial Standard Time, with the mechanical precision that characterizes all administratum communications. Your hands shake as you read the text, each word hitting your consciousness like a physical blow. Citizen CHENVUSS, MARKUS. Designation 847-740-429. You are hereby summoned for mandatory nutritional assessment and family unit evaluation. Report to processing station Gamma at 1200 hours with all dependent family members. Failure to comply will result in immediate reassignment to biomass processing schedule. Family unit evaluation. The phrase makes your throat constrict with terror because you know what it means. In the 18 months since the implementation of Emergency Nutrition Protocol Sigma Black, the euphemisms have become as familiar as prayers to the Emperor. Family unit evaluation means they're going to decide which of your loved ones lives and which becomes food for the others. Your productivity scores have been declining. You know this because every citizen receives weekly performance assessments, small data slips that track everything from work output to caloric consumption to psychological stability indices. Your numbers have been trending downward for 6 months now, ever since the malnutrition began affecting your concentration and the chronic sleep deprivation started causing tremors in your hands. It's a vicious cycle designed with mechanical precision. Inadequate nutrition leads to decreased productivity, which leads to lower ration allocations, which leads to further malnutrition. The system identifies the weak and marks them for elimination with the same algorithmic efficiency that manages air recycling or waste disposal. But it's not just your declining performance that terrifies you. It's the evaluation protocols you've heard whispered about in the shadowy corners of the HAB blocks. Children under 10 are classified as high-value biomass due to the tenderness of their flesh and the absence of industrial toxins that accumulate in adult tissue. The younger the child, the higher their nutritional rating. The higher their nutritional rating, the more likely they are to be selected for voluntary contribution to community nutrition programs. Your daughter, Maylin, is 8 years old, prime selection age. At 1200 hours exactly, you stand before processing station Gamma with your wife, Yana, and Maylin pressed between you like a small shield against the horror you're about to face. The station resembles a medical facility, clean white walls, bright lights, the sterile efficiency of imperial healthcare. But you can smell something underneath the antiseptic, the faint, organic scent of fear sweat from thousands of previous evaluations. The processing queue moves with bureaucratic precision. Families are called forward in numerical order, disappear through automated doors marked with the administratum seal, and emerge, if they emerge at all, changed in ways that have nothing to do with physical modification and everything to do with the death of hope. Family Unit CHENVUSS, announces a servoskull hovering nearby, its vox grill crackling with mechanical authority. Proceed to Evaluation Chamber 7-4 Assessment. The chamber beyond the doors is exactly what you feared. A medical examination room equipped with the kind of sophisticated biometric scanners that can determine everything from genetic fitness to psychological stability to nutritional content per kilogram of body mass. 3 figures await you: an administratum assessor whose augmetic modifications have rendered him more machine than man, a medici orderly whose face bears the blank expression of someone who has learned to perform atrocities with clinical detachment, and a scribe servitor whose function is to record every detail of the evaluation for archival purposes. Please disrobe completely, the assessor says in a voice devoid of emotion or humanity. Physical examination is mandatory for accurate biomass assessment. Biomass assessment, not medical evaluation, not health screening. The clinical precision of the language makes it clear that you're not here as patients seeking treatment. You're here as livestock being evaluated for slaughter. The examination that follows is thorough to the point of violation. Biometric scanners measure bone density, muscle mass, fat distribution, organ health. Blood samples are taken for genetic analysis and disease screening. Psychological evaluation protocols probe for signs of mental instability that might affect processing efficiency. Every aspect of your physical and mental being is cataloged, measured, and assigned a numerical value that will determine your family's fate. Maylin cries during her examination, not the sharp, angry crying of a child having a tantrum, but the deep, heartbroken sobs of someone who understands, on an instinctive level, that something terrible is happening to her world. The medici orderly handles her with the same clinical efficiency he would use for any other piece of medical equipment, noting her responses in a data slate that glows with the sickly green light of imperial technology. Subject displays optimal nutritional characteristics, the orderly announces as he completes Maylin's evaluation. Muscle development consistent with age parameters. No detectable genetic anomalies. Preliminary assessment, grade A biomass. Grade A biomass. The words hit you like a physical blow. In the classification system developed by the administratum, grade A biomass is reserved for subjects who provide optimal nutritional value, young, healthy, free from disease or genetic defects that might compromise food safety. Grade A biomass is processed immediately without delay to maximize freshness and minimize spoilage. Your 8-year-old daughter has just been classified as premium food. Please remain calm, the assessor says as he notices your obvious distress. Classification does not determine final selection. Multiple factors contribute to processing decisions, including family unit productivity indices, social contribution metrics, and community integration assessments. But you can see the truth in the data slate he carries. Your productivity scores are there, glowing red in the suboptimal category. Your wife's scores are similarly poor. Malnutrition has affected her work performance in the textile manufactorum, and her psychological evaluations indicate diminished stress tolerance and reduced compliance metrics. 2 adult family members with declining productivity, plus 1 child with optimal nutritional characteristics. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Your family unit represents a net resource drain in 2/3 of its members, combined with high-value biomass in the remaining third. The algorithmic logic is inescapable. Preliminary recommendation, the assessor announces, reading from his data slate with the same tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. Adult subjects Chen Voss, Marcus and Chen Voss, Yana are classified for immediate biomass processing. Minor subject Chen Voss, Maylin is approved for nutritional contribution program with processing scheduled for 72 hours post-parental processing to minimize psychological trauma that might affect meat quality. 72 hours. They're going to let your daughter live for exactly 3 more days, just long enough for her to watch her parents die and be processed into food, before they kill her and turn her into meat for others to consume. The clinical consideration for minimizing psychological trauma isn't motivated by mercy. It's designed to prevent stress hormones from affecting the taste of her flesh. Your wife makes a sound that isn't quite human, a keening wail that contains all the grief and horror and helpless rage of a parent facing the systematic murder of her family. The scribe servitor dutifully records her response as excessive emotional display, indicating potential processing complications. Please understand, the assessor continues with mechanical sympathy. Your sacrifice serves the greater good of imperial society. Your biomass will provide nutritional support for approximately 156 other citizens for a period of 1 solar day. The emperor protects through the willing sacrifice of his faithful servants. Willing sacrifice. The phrase is obscene in its dishonesty, but it reflects the elaborate psychological framework that the Imperium has constructed to make cannibalism palatable to both its implementers and its victims. By reframing murder as sacrifice, consumption as communion, and survival as service, the system transforms atrocity into duty. But even as the assessor speaks, you notice something that sends a different kind of chill through your system. Behind the clinical detachment, behind the augmetic modifications and bureaucratic efficiency, you catch a glimpse of something human in his eyes. For just a moment, the mask slips, and you see the horror that he carries, the weight of thousands of evaluations, thousands of families destroyed, thousands of children classified as grade A biomass. He's not a monster. He's a human being who has been systematically conditioned to perform monstrous acts through bureaucratic processes designed to distribute moral responsibility so widely that no individual feels culpable for the final result. He's following protocols developed by committees, implementing policies approved by boards, executing orders issued by supervisors who report to administrators who serve officials who answer to authorities, whose names he'll never know. The system isn't run by sadists or psychopaths. It's operated by ordinary people who have been trained to suppress their human instincts in service to imperial efficiency. And that, somehow, makes it infinitely more terrifying than simple evil would be. As security servitors escort your family toward the holding areas where you'll await processing, you pass other families in various stages of evaluation. You see a mother clutching an infant that's been classified as suboptimal biomass due to insufficient muscle development. You see a father whose augmetic leg has earned him a mechanical contamination rating that disqualifies him from food processing, but makes him suitable for industrial lubricant synthesis. You see children saying goodbye to parents they'll never see alive again, and parents trying to comfort children who don't understand why everyone around them is crying. And through it all, the system operates with mechanical precision. Forms are filled out in triplicate. Evaluations are recorded and filed. Processing schedules are updated in real time. The bureaucracy of cannibalism functions with the same methodical efficiency that characterizes all imperial administration, transforming mass murder into routine paperwork. In the holding area, as you wait for processing that will begin in exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes, you hold your daughter and try to think of something to tell her that will make sense of what's happening. But there are no words for this. No way to explain to an 8-year-old why the civilization that was supposed to protect her has decided to eat her instead. The only truth you can offer is the one that the Imperium itself provides. The Emperor protects Meilin. No matter what happens, the Emperor protects. But even as you say the words, you know they're a lie. The Emperor protects the Imperium, not the individuals within it. And sometimes, protecting the Imperium requires consuming its citizens one family at a time, with the mechanical precision that makes the grim darkness of the far future run on schedule. Your daughter looks up at you with eyes that still hold innocence, and asks the question that will haunt you for the remaining 6 hours of your life. Daddy, will it hurt? And you realize that even now, even facing the systematic murder and consumption of your family, your instinct is to lie to her. To tell her it won't hurt, that everything will be fine, that the people in white coats are going to help her. Because the that she's going to die in terror and agony so that strangers can have their daily protein ration, is something that no parent should ever have to say to their child. The selection process, you understand now, isn't just about choosing who lives and who dies. It's about killing hope with the same methodical precision used to kill people, ensuring that even the final moments of human connection are poisoned by the necessity of lies. In the grim darkness of the far future, even love becomes complicit in the machinery of horror. You are adept biologist kind, and today you are conducting an orientation session for newly assigned processing staff. The individual you're addressing, a former textile worker whose sector was recently converted to biomass operations, stands before you with the hollow-eyed expression that all new employees display when they first understand the nature of their work assignment. Her hands shake slightly as she holds the data slate containing her job specifications, and you note that tremor in your mental assessment file. Excessive emotional response to routine industrial processes indicates potential efficiency problems. Welcome to Processing Facility Omega-7, you begin, your augmetic vocal cords producing speech with mechanical precision, while your organic brain calculates the most effective way to acclimate another human being to the systematic slaughter and consumption of their own species. Your assignment here represents a crucial contribution to the continuation of imperial civilization. The work we do ensures the survival of billions. The orientation chamber overlooks the main processing floor through reinforced transparent steel that provides an unobstructed view of the industrial machinery that transforms human beings into nutritional products. Below, conveyor systems move with the rhythmic precision of imperial manufacturing, carrying what the official documentation refers to as biomass units through various stages of processing, refinement, and packaging. You gesture toward the viewing window, and your new employee, designation Theta 4, formerly known as Maris Thale, follows your indication with obvious reluctance. Her first glimpse of the processing floor causes her to take an involuntary step backward, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and nausea, before settling into the blank mask that most staff develop within the first week of employment. The facility operates on a 3-shift rotation, you continue, consulting your data slate for the standard orientation parameters. Daily processing capacity, 10,000 biomass units per shift. Average processing time per unit, 14, 3 minutes from initial receiving to final packaging. Quality control standards are maintained at 99, 7% efficiency, exceeding imperial manufacturing guidelines for food safety and nutritional consistency. Biomass units, processing time, quality control. The clinical language is essential for maintaining staff psychological stability. Direct acknowledgement of what those units actually are, human beings with names, families, hopes, fears, individual personalities that are about to be mechanically obliterated, would make the system impossible to operate. Euphemism isn't just bureaucratic preference here, it's psychological necessity. You lead Theta 4 down to the receiving area, where the day's shipment of subjects has just arrived from the selection centers. They're transported in standard imperial cargo haulers, the same vehicles used to move grain shipments or manufactured goods between sectors. The efficiency of repurposing existing logistics infrastructure demonstrates the administratum's characteristic resourcefulness in implementing new policies. Initial receiving involves basic classification and preparation procedures. You explain as servosculls hover nearby, recording everything for training archives and quality assurance reviews. Subjects are sorted according to processing protocols. Immediate processing for optimal grade biomass, delayed processing for subjects requiring medical intervention to maximize yield, and specialized handling for unique nutritional requirements. The subjects in today's shipment represent the full spectrum of Hive city population, families selected for processing, individuals whose productivity scores have declined below acceptable thresholds, children classified as high-value biomass due to their nutritional characteristics. They move through the receiving area with the mechanical compliance that characterizes people who have been psychologically broken by a system too vast and powerful to comprehend, let alone resist. You notice Theta 4's attention drawn to a particular family unit, 2 adults and 3 children who are being separated according to processing protocols. The children, classified as grade A biomass due to their age and health status, are directed toward immediate processing stations. The adults, whose bodies show signs of malnutrition and industrial contamination, are routed toward preliminary treatment procedures designed to optimize their nutritional value. Optimal processing requires careful preparation, you continue, guiding Theta 4 toward the treatment areas. Adult subjects typically undergo 48 to 72 hours of nutritional enhancement to improve meat quality. This includes hydration therapy, vitamin supplementation, and stress hormone reduction protocols. The goal is to maximize both quantity and quality of usable biomass. Stress hormone reduction. The clinical term refers to a combination of mild sedatives and psychological conditioning designed to keep subjects calm during their final days. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline affect meat flavor and texture, creating what quality control evaluations classify as suboptimal taste profiles. The treatment isn't motivated by mercy, it's pure food science applied to human livestock. The treatment chambers resemble medical facilities, clean, bright, equipped with the kind of sophisticated monitoring systems used in imperial hospitals. Subjects are housed in individual cells that provide adequate space, temperature control, and even basic entertainment systems. To an outside observer, it might appear that they're receiving medical care rather than being prepared for slaughter. Psychological comfort during the preparation phase is essential, you explain as Theta 4 observes subjects watching pick screens that display imperial propaganda and soothing imagery. Agitated subjects produce inferior biomass quality. The preparation protocols are designed to maintain subjects in a state of calm acceptance until processing begins. Calm acceptance. The phrase encompasses one of the most horrifying aspects of the entire system. The way that victims are conditioned to participate passively in their own destruction. Through a combination of pharmaceutical intervention, psychological manipulation, and the crushing weight of imperial authority, subjects learn to accept their fate with the same resignation they might display toward any other bureaucratic process. You lead Theta 4 to observe one of the preparation chambers, where a middle-aged man sits quietly reading imperial scripture, while intravenous lines deliver the nutritional supplements that will improve his flesh quality. He seems almost content, his face showing the peaceful expression of someone who has found a way to make sense of senseless circumstances. The psychological conditioning protocols have convinced him that his death serves the emperor's will, that his sacrifice ensures the survival of imperial civilization. Subject 7442 Alpha demonstrates optimal preparation response, you note, consulting your data slate. Compliance rating, 97%. Stress indicators within acceptable parameters. Estimated processing yield, 89% of theoretical maximum. This represents the standard we expect all subjects to achieve. The man in the preparation chamber has been successfully transformed from a human being with agency and dignity into a compliant resource, awaiting conversion into food. The system hasn't just condemned him to death, it has convinced him to embrace that death as meaningful service to the Imperium. And the most disturbing aspect is that he genuinely appears to believe it. You continue the tour to the primary processing areas, where Theta 4 will be expected to perform her assigned duties. The machinery here operates with the same mechanical precision that characterizes all imperial manufacturing, but its purpose transforms familiar industrial processes into something fundamentally horrifying. Conveyor systems that might normally carry manufactured goods instead transport human bodies. Quality control stations that would typically inspect mechanical components Instead, examine cuts of human flesh for consistency and contamination. Each processing station handles specific aspects of biomass conversion, you explain, pointing to various workstations where staff perform their duties with the mechanical efficiency that the Imperium demands of all its servants. Initial processing removes non-nutritional components. Secondary refinement extracts usable proteins and fats. Final packaging prepares products for distribution to consumption centers throughout the hive. The workers you pass seem entirely normal, ordinary imperial citizens performing their assigned duties with the competence and dedication expected of all servants of the Emperor. They've learned to see their work as technical tasks rather than moral choices, focusing on efficiency metrics and quality standards rather than the human cost of their labor. The system has successfully trained them to be complicit in atrocity without feeling personal responsibility for its consequences. Theta 4 watches one worker, a woman approximately her own age, efficiently processing what was once a child approximately the age of her own daughter. The worker's movements are practiced and precise, her face showing the concentration of someone performing skilled labor rather than the expression you might expect from someone dismembering a murdered child. She's learned to see flesh and bone rather than person, protein and fat rather than individual identity. Quality control is paramount throughout all processing stages. You continue, leading Theta 4 toward the inspection stations where finished products undergo final evaluation before packaging. All biomass is tested for disease, contamination, and nutritional consistency. Products that fail to meet imperial food safety standards are redirected to industrial applications or waste disposal. The quality control station represents the final transformation in the journey from person to product. Here, what were once human beings become indistinguishable from any other protein source, cuts of meat labeled with nutritional information, expiration dates, and handling instructions. The packaging bears imperial seals and administratum certification marks, the same bureaucratic symbols that appear on grain shipments or manufactured goods. Worker performance is evaluated according to standard imperial productivity metrics. You explain as Theta 4 reviews her duty assignments. Processing quotas, quality ratings, efficiency measures, and compliance with safety protocols. Exceptional performance is noted in personnel files and may result in promotion opportunities within the biological processing hierarchy. Performance incentives, career advancement, professional development in the field of human processing. The system has taken the ordinary motivations that drive imperial workers, the desire for better assignments, higher status, improved living conditions, and applied them to the systematic murder and consumption of their fellow citizens. As the orientation concludes, you observe Theta 4's psychological state with the clinical detachment that your position requires. She displays the typical response pattern, initial shock and horror giving way to resigned acceptance as she realizes that resistance is futile and compliance is the only path to survival. Within a week, she'll be performing her duties with the same mechanical efficiency as the other workers. Within a month, she'll stop seeing the subjects as people and start seeing them as processing challenges to be solved with technical precision. Do you have any questions about your duties or the facility operations? You ask, completing the standard orientation protocol. Theta 4 looks at you with eyes that have already begun to develop the blank expression that characterizes all processing facility staff. When she speaks, her voice carries the flat affect of someone who has learned to suppress emotional responses that might interfere with job performance. When do I start? The question represents complete psychological capitulation to the system. She's not asking whether she can refuse the assignment, or how she might transfer to different work, or what alternatives might exist. She's asking when she begins participating in systematic cannibalism as a routine employment duty. And you realize, as you provide her with shift schedules and duty rosters, that you're witnessing the death of moral agency itself. The The system hasn't just normalized cannibalism. It has transformed it into ordinary work performed by ordinary people who have learned to see extraordinary evil as routine professional obligation. Your first shift begins at 800 hours tomorrow, you inform her, noting her compliance in the permanent personnel records that will follow her throughout her service to the Imperium. Report to Station 7 for processing duty assignment. Welcome to the team, Theta 4. She nods and walks away, her posture already reflecting the resignation that characterizes all facility personnel. By tomorrow, she'll be efficiently processing human beings into food products with the same dedication that other Imperial workers bring to ammunition production or void ship maintenance. And the most horrifying realization of all is that this represents victory for the system. Not just the physical victory of maintaining food supplies for the Hive population, but the moral victory of proving that any atrocity can be normalized through sufficient bureaucratic structure and psychological conditioning. In the grim darkness of the far future, you understand, even love and compassion can be processed into compliance with mechanical efficiency. And somewhere in the vast Imperium, millions of other workers are beginning their shifts in similar facilities, transforming human beings into industrial products with the methodical precision that makes civilization possible. The processing centers, you realize, don't just convert people into food. They convert humans into monsters, one shift at a time, with the inexorable efficiency that defines Imperial administration. You are sitting at a communal dining table in Hab Block Tertius, sublevel 1247, and you're trying very hard not to think about what you're eating. The protein ration arrived this morning via the usual distribution channels, sealed packages bearing Imperial nutritional certification marks and expiration dates that guarantee freshness and safety. The texture is slightly different today, more tender than usual, with a flavor that seems almost familiar in a way that makes your stomach clench with horror. Around you, 43 other residents of your Hab block consume their daily protein allocations with the mechanical efficiency that characterizes all aspects of Hive life. Conversation is muted, consisting primarily of practical discussions about work assignments, air recycling schedules, and the minor bureaucratic details that fill the spaces between birth and death in Imperial society. No one talks about the food. No one ever talks about the food anymore. But everyone knows. The knowledge sits in the dining chamber like an invisible presence that affects every interaction, every conversation, every moment of human connection. It's there in the way people avoid making eye contact while eating. It's there in the pauses that occur whenever someone mentions a neighbor who hasn't been seen recently. It's there in the careful way that parents distract their children during mealtimes, steering conversations away from questions about taste and texture, and the origins of daily sustenance. Across from you sits Overseer Mordian Thane, the same man you encountered earlier in the administrative levels. Here, in the communal dining area, he appears less like an Imperial official and more like what he actually is, a human being trying to maintain psychological equilibrium while participating in systematic cannibalism. His hands shake slightly as he consumes his protein ration, and you notice that he takes smaller bites than the official nutritional guidelines recommend. The key to maintaining social stability, Thane says quietly, speaking to no one in particular, but addressing the unspoken questions that haunt everyone at the table, is understanding that individual sacrifice serves the collective good. Every citizen who contributes to the nutritional program ensures the survival of dozens of others. Individual sacrifice, nutritional program, collective good. The euphemisms have become so embedded in daily speech that people use them unconsciously, their minds automatically substituting clinical terminology for words that might trigger emotional responses they can't afford to experience. The language itself has been processed and refined, stripped of emotional content that might interfere with psychological compliance. My brother was selected last month, says a woman whose work assignment involves managing air recycling systems for her sector. Her voice carries the flat affect that most people develop when discussing family members who have been processed. His contribution coefficient was exceptional. The administratum sent a commendation notice, acknowledging his service to imperial society. She speaks about her brother's murder and consumption, as if discussing a career achievement or academic honor. The psychological conditioning protocols have been so effective that she's learned to take pride in his death, to see his transformation into food as evidence of his value rather than the destruction of his humanity. At the far end of the table, a child, she can't be more than 10 years old, asks the question that every adult in the chamber has learned not to voice. Why does the protein taste different when people go away? The silence that follows is absolute. Every adult at the table stops eating, stops breathing, stops moving as they confront the innocent observation that cuts through all their carefully constructed psychological defenses. The child has noticed what they've all noticed but learned not to acknowledge, that the protein rations taste different when people from their sector are selected for processing. Her mother responds with the kind of patient explanation that parents throughout the hive have learned to provide. The administratum adjusts nutritional formulations based on available resources, sweetening. Different sources provide different flavor profiles, but all protein is blessed by the emperor and serves his will. Different sources, flavor profiles, blessed by the emperor. The mother has learned to speak about cannibalism in terms that preserve her daughter's innocence while maintaining her own sanity. She's explaining the consumption of human flesh as if discussing agricultural variation or food preparation techniques. And the child accepts this explanation because children in the hive learn early that adult answers about difficult subjects should not be questioned further. She returns to her meal without additional inquiry, but you can see something in her expression, a flicker of understanding that she's not ready to process, knowledge that will grow in her mind like a malignant tumor until she reaches the age where psychological conditioning protocols teach her to suppress it. The adaptation process varies by individual, explains a former teacher named Miriam who now works in nutritional distribution logistics. Her role involves calculating protein requirements and coordinating delivery schedules for processed biomass throughout her sector. Some citizens adjust quickly to revised nutritional protocols. Others require extended psychological support to achieve optimal compliance levels. Extended psychological support. The clinical term refers to a combination of pharmaceutical intervention and behavioral conditioning designed to help people cope with the knowledge that they're eating their neighbors. The treatment doesn't eliminate awareness. That would be counterproductive, since conscious participation in the system serves important social control functions. Instead, it helps people compartmentalize their knowledge in ways that allow them to function normally while participating in systematic cannibalism. I attended processing orientation last week, Miriam continues, her voice taking on the instructional tone she once used to educate children about imperial history and civic duty. The educational materials explain how biomass recycling serves essential resource management functions. Citizens selected for nutritional contribution are making the ultimate sacrifice for their fellow imperial subjects. Biomass recycling, nutritional contribution, ultimate sacrifice. The language has evolved to transform murder into martyrdom, consumption into communion with imperial values. People don't eat human flesh. They participate in biomass recycling programs that honor the sacrificial service of their fellow citizens. But underneath the carefully constructed terminology, you can see the psychological cost that this knowledge exacts from everyone who carries it. Thane's hands continue to shake as he eats. Miriam's eyes never focus directly on her food, always looking slightly to one side, as if avoiding direct confrontation with what she's consuming. The mother who explained protein variation to her daughter takes smaller and smaller bites as the meal progresses, her body rejecting sustenance that her mind knows is wrong. The children adapt most effectively, observes a worker whose assignment involves monitoring psychological wellness metrics for the sector. Citizens born after protocol implementation show significantly lower stress responses to nutritional program participation. They display optimal acceptance levels for biomass recycling as standard resource management practice. The children, born into a world where cannibalism is policy, they grow up without the psychological frameworks that would make the practice horrifying. For them, eating processed human flesh is as normal as breathing recycled air or working assigned shifts in imperial manufactorias. They don't need psychological conditioning because they've never known anything different. And watching them eat their protein rations with the casual acceptance that previous generations reserved for grain-based foods, you realize that you're witnessing the birth of a new kind of human being, not physically different, but psychologically transformed in ways that will define their species for generations to come. They are the first generation of humans for whom cannibalism is not taboo, but simply another aspect of imperial resource management. There are still resistance elements, Thane admits quietly, his voice dropping to a whisper that won't carry to the monitoring systems that record all conversations in communal areas. Underground networks that attempt to sabotage processing operations or help selected citizens avoid nutritional contribution schedules. The security apparatus handles these disruptions with appropriate efficiency. Appropriate efficiency, the euphemism for the systematic hunting and elimination of anyone who attempts to interfere with the cannibalistic food production system. The resistance networks that Thane mentions are typically composed of individuals who retain pre-protocol moral frameworks, people whose psychological conditioning was incomplete, or who possess unusual resistance to behavioral modification techniques. Most resistance activity is futile, continues the psychological wellness monitor, consulting data from her portable cogitator. Citizens who attempt to disrupt nutritional programs are inevitably detected and reassigned to immediate processing schedules. Their biomass contribution partially compensates for the resource disruption caused by their resistance activities. Inevitable detection, immediate processing, biomass contribution. The system has created a closed loop where resistance to cannibalism results in being consumed, where opposition to the program becomes part of the program itself. The rebels don't escape the system, they become food that nourishes those who accept it. As the communal meal concludes and residents begin to disperse to their individual hab units or work assignments, you notice the subtle rituals that have developed around the consumption of processed human flesh. People don't discuss the food directly, but they engage in elaborate conversations about other topics while eating. They clean their eating utensils with unusual thoroughness, as if attempting to wash away more than simple food residue. They avoid making eye contact with each other during the actual consumption process, preserving some small measure of privacy in an act that feels inherently violating. The Emperor protects, Thane says as he prepares to leave, offering the traditional imperial blessing that has taken on new meaning in the context of systematic cannibalism. Through our sacrifice, we serve his will. Through our service, we ensure survival. Through our sacrifice. The phrase encompasses both the people who die to provide food and the people who live by consuming them. Everyone in the system is sacrificing something. Those who are processed sacrifice their lives, while those who remain sacrifice their humanity. The cannibalistic program doesn't just consume individual bodies, it devours the moral foundations of civilization itself. And as you finish your own protein ration, trying not to think about the texture, the flavor, the possibility that you're consuming someone you might have known, you understand that the most horrifying aspect of the system isn't the cannibalism itself. It's how quickly and thoroughly human beings can adapt to it when adaptation becomes the only alternative to death. In the grim darkness of the far future, you realize the greatest enemy of humanity isn't the alien forces that threaten the Imperium from without. It's the capacity for moral flexibility that allows the species to survive by consuming itself, one meal at a time, while maintaining the psychological frameworks that make daily existence possible. The knowledge sits in your stomach like a physical weight, and you understand that you'll carry it for the rest of your life, however long that might be, depending on your next productivity evaluation. And someday, when your own numbers decline below acceptable thresholds, you'll become knowledge that others carry in their stomachs, thinking carefully about texture and flavor while avoiding direct acknowledgement of what they know to be true. Living with the knowledge you understand now isn't about accepting cannibalism as policy. It's about learning to be human in a world where humanity itself has become a consumable resource, processed and packaged with the same mechanical efficiency that characterizes all imperial administration. You are Senior Administratum Investigator Valdez, Efficiency Analysis Division, and you've just discovered something that makes every previous horror seem like a minor administrative inconvenience. The data slate in your hands contains information that fundamentally alters your understanding of emergency nutrition, Protocol Sigma Black, transforming what you believe to be desperate crisis management into something infinitely more sinister. Your assignment seemed straightforward when it arrived 6 weeks ago. Conduct a comprehensive efficiency analysis of the cannibalistic food production system with the goal of optimizing resource allocation and reducing processing waste. The Administratum values continuous improvement in all operations, and systematic cannibalism apparently requires the same methodical refinement that characterizes munitions production or void ship construction. You began the investigation with the clinical detachment that defines all Administratum work, treating the consumption of human flesh as just another logistical challenge to be solved through proper application of imperial bureaucratic expertise. The moral implications weren't your concern. Policy had already determined that cannibalism was necessary for Hive survival, and your role was simply to make the system more efficient. But efficiency analysis requires access to classified data that most imperial citizens never see, and what you've discovered in those restricted files has shattered every assumption you held about the nature of the program you were assigned to optimize. The first inconsistency appeared in the agricultural production reports. According to official documentation provided to sector administrators and processing facility supervisors, food production capacity throughout the segmentum solar had declined by approximately 23% over the past 18 months due to Xenos raids, warp storms, and mechanical failures in agri-world harvesting systems. The shortfall necessitated implementation of alternative protein sources to prevent mass starvation in high population density areas. But the classified agricultural reports tell a different story entirely. Food production capacity has actually increased by 12% over the same period. New agri-worlds have come online ahead of schedule. Harvesting efficiency has improved due to technological upgrades in automated farming systems. The Imperium is producing more food than it has in decades, not less. You stare at the data slate displaying production figures that contradict everything you've been told about the necessity of cannibalistic protocols, and you feel something cold settling into your chest like a physical weight. If food production is actually increasing, then why are billions of imperial citizens being processed into protein rations to prevent starvation that isn't actually occurring? The deeper you dig into the classified files, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. Transportation records show massive shipments of grain, protein, and processed food leaving Hive worlds on a daily basis. Destination: off-world luxury markets serving wealthy imperial elites who pay premium prices for authentic agri-world organic produce. The same food that could feed billions of Hive citizens is being exported to provide exotic dining experiences for nobles who consider synthesized nutrition beneath their refined palates. You access trade manifests that document the economic reality behind the artificial scarcity. A kilogram of genuine agri-world grain sells for 1,000 times the price of processed human protein on the luxury food markets that serve the upper levels of imperial society. The profit margins are so enormous that it's economically advantageous to let populations starve, while exporting their food to customers who can afford to pay for the privilege of eating crops grown under natural sunlight. But even this discovery, horrifying as it is, doesn't prepare you for what you find when you access the population control archives. The cannibalistic protocols aren't a response to food shortages. They're not emergency measures implemented to prevent mass starvation. They're deliberate policy designed to achieve optimal population density through systematic psychological conditioning and selective elimination of suboptimal citizens. The artificial scarcity serves multiple strategic objectives that have nothing to do with nutrition and everything to do with social control. You access a planning document authored by high administratum officials whose names carry the weight of imperial authority, and you read words that fundamentally alter your understanding of human civilization. Population psychological conditioning through controlled resource scarcity produces optimal compliance characteristics in subject populations. Citizens who participate in sanctioned cannibalistic protocols demonstrate increased loyalty indices, reduced resistance potential, and enhanced productivity metrics compared to populations with adequate nutritional access. Enhanced productivity metrics. The cannibalistic system doesn't just solve food distribution problems. It creates more efficient workers. People who have been psychologically conditioned to eat their neighbors demonstrate superior compliance with imperial authority, work longer hours with fewer complaints, and report significantly lower rates of seditious thinking compared to populations that haven't participated in systematic cannibalism. The document continues with clinical analysis that treats human psychology like any other resource to be optimized through proper management techniques. Citizens who consume processed biomass from their own communities develop powerful psychological investment in system continuation. Moral complicity creates resistance to revolutionary ideologies while simultaneously reducing cognitive resources available for political organization. Cannibalistic populations self-regulate through internalized guilt mechanisms that eliminate need for extensive security apparatus oversight. Self-regulation through internalized guilt. The system turns every citizen into their own prison guard, using psychological trauma to create compliance that no external authority could achieve through force alone. People who have eaten their neighbors can't rebel against the system that forced them to do it, because rebellion would require confronting their own complicity in systematic horror. You access implementation records that reveal the true scope of the program. Hive Primus Magnifica isn't unique. It's a test case. Similar protocols are being implemented across 17 different Hive worlds, affecting populations totaling over 2-3 trillion imperial citizens. The cannibalistic system you thought was local emergency management is actually a segmentum-wide social engineering project designed to create permanent psychological subjugation across multiple worlds simultaneously. The economic analysis is particularly chilling in its clinical precision. Processing human beings into food costs approximately 340% more than importing adequate nutrition from agri-worlds. The cannibalistic system is deliberately inefficient from a resource perspective, but it produces psychological and social benefits that imperial planners consider worth the additional expense. The program isn't saving money. It's spending enormous amounts of resources to transform human populations into psychologically controlled livestock. But the discovery that finally breaks something fundamental in your understanding of imperial civilization comes when you access the luxury consumption records for upper Hive levels. The wealthy citizens who live in the spires above the processing facilities aren't just eating exported agri-world produce. They're consuming processed human flesh as a delicacy, paying premium prices for what they consider exotic protein sources with unique flavor profiles. The cannibalistic system has created a two-tiered market. Lower levels consume processed biomass from their own populations as survival rations, while upper levels consume the same products as luxury cuisine. The wealthy aren't isolated from the horror. They're enthusiastic participants who have transformed systematic murder into gourmet dining experiences. You access menu records from exclusive dining establishments serving the imperial elite, and you read descriptions that make your stomach turn with revulsion. Tender juvenile biomass, aged 72 hours, served with synthetic truffle reduction and imported wine pairings. The psychological stress-free preparation process ensures optimal flavor development and texture consistency. A truly unique dining experience that celebrates the ultimate sacrifice of imperial citizenship. Tender juvenile biomass, psychological stress-free preparation, ultimate sacrifice. The wealthy have developed their own euphemistic language for consuming murdered children, transforming cannibalism into culinary art that celebrates the very horror that traumatizes lower hive populations. The luxury market records reveal that demand for processed human flesh has been increasing steadily among imperial elites, not just as protein source, but as symbol of absolute power over their subjects. Consuming the processed remains of citizens represents the ultimate expression of aristocratic authority, the power to literally devour those they govern. And then you discover the breeding programs. Deep in the classified archives, you find documentation for facilities that exist solely to produce human beings optimized for consumption. Not prisons where criminals are processed, not selection centers where existing citizens are evaluated, but agricultural installations where humans are bred, raised, and slaughtered with the same systematic efficiency applied to livestock production. The breeding facilities maintain genetic diversity through careful selection protocols, produce subjects with optimal nutritional characteristics, and implement psychological conditioning from birth to ensure compliance during processing. The humans produced in these installations never experience freedom, never develop the social connections that might create resistance to their eventual slaughter, never learn that existence could involve anything other than serving as food for others. You-Access Production reports that detail yield optimization, flavor enhancement protocols, and quality control measures applied to human farming with the same methodical precision used for any other agricultural product. The facilities produce approximately 50 million harvest-ready units annually, providing steady supplies of premium biomass for luxury markets while maintaining genetic stock for continued production. The documents describe these humans with terminology that systematically strips away any acknowledgement of their sentience. Livestock units, harvest inventory, breeding stock, production assets. They're not considered people. They're considered agricultural products that happen to have human DNA. As you sit in your office surrounded by data slates containing evidence of systematic atrocity implemented as imperial policy, you realize that your investigation has uncovered something far worse than inefficient resource allocation. You've discovered that the Imperium has industrialized the complete dehumanization of its own citizens, creating systems that transform people into products while simultaneously conditioning population to accept and participate in their own consumption. The cannibalistic protocols aren't desperate emergency measures. They're social engineering tools designed to create permanent psychological subjugation across multiple worlds. The artificial scarcity isn't resource management failure. It's deliberate policy designed to maximize profit for imperial elites while breaking the spirits of subject populations. And the breeding facilities represent the logical endpoint of the system. Humans reduced to agricultural products, their entire existence from conception to slaughter serving no purpose other than providing luxury food for those with sufficient wealth and power to consume their own species as entertainment. You understand now why your investigation required such extensive security clearances and psychological evaluation before authorization. The knowledge you've uncovered would be psychologically devastating to most imperial citizens, potentially triggering resistance activities that could disrupt the carefully maintained balance of horror and compliance that keeps the system functioning. But the most devastating realization comes when you review your own family records and discover that your wife and children were processed into biomass 6 weeks ago, while you were conducting the investigation that you believed would help optimize the system that murdered them. Their deaths provided nutrition for approximately 150 other citizens for a period of 1 solar day, and their processed remains were likely consumed by you during the daily protein rations you received in the administratum commissary. The system didn't just force you to participate in systematic cannibalism. It made you complicit in consuming your own family while believing you were performing valuable service to imperial efficiency. The optimization protocols you developed will make the processing of future families more efficient, reducing waste and improving nutritional yield from the systematic slaughter of imperial citizens. And now, as you sit in your office holding evidence that could expose the entire system as unnecessary atrocity implemented for profit and social control, you face the final choice that defines existence in the imperium of man: whether to resist knowledge that makes resistance impossible, or to accept complicity that makes survival possible. The data slate in your hands contains information that could save billions of lives, if anyone with sufficient authority to act on it could be convinced to abandon a system that serves their interests perfectly. But reporting these findings would require acknowledging your own participation in the murder and consumption of your family, accepting responsibility for optimizing systems that you now know exist solely to traumatize and control imperial citizens. In the grim darkness of the far future, you realize the ultimate horror isn't the existence of systematic evil. It's the discovery that evil serves logical purposes that make it impossible to eliminate without destroying the civilization that depends on it. The Imperium doesn't commit atrocities despite being the defender of humanity. It commits atrocities because consuming its own citizens has become the most effective way to maintain the psychological control necessary to defend humanity against threats that require absolute obedience to authority. And as you prepare to submit your efficiency optimization report, because failure to complete assigned duties would mark you for immediate processing, you understand that you've become something worse than a victim of the system. You've become its willing architect, optimizing horror with the same methodical precision that built the greatest human civilization in galactic history. You stand at the observation deck of Spire Apex, Hive Primus Magnifica, and gaze down through reinforced transparasteel at the vertical city that stretches below you for 200 levels of systematic horror. From this height, the individual human tragedies are invisible, processed into statistical abstractions by sheer scale and distance. What you see instead is the mechanical precision of imperial civilization. Transportation networks moving with rhythmic efficiency, work sectors operating at optimal productivity levels, population centers maintaining stability despite implementing systematic cannibalism as standard resource management policy. It has been 3 years since Emergency Nutrition Protocol Sigma Black transformed cannibalism from unthinkable taboo into routine administrative function. 3 years since the Imperium demonstrated that any atrocity can be normalized through sufficient bureaucratic structure and psychological conditioning. 3 years since humanity learned that survival can justify absolutely anything when the alternative is extinction. And in those 3 years, something fundamental has changed in the human species itself. You're accompanied by Dr. Lysander Voss, Chief Psychological Analyst for the Segmentum Solar, whose research focuses on the long-term societal impacts of systematic cannibalism implementation. His studies track behavioral modifications across multiple generations, documenting how participation in biomass recycling programs affects everything from family bonding to creative expression to the basic cognitive frameworks that define human consciousness. The adaptation has exceeded our most optimistic projections, Dr. Voss explains, consulting data streams that flow across his augmented visual interface. Initial psychological resistance has been replaced by integrated acceptance across 94.7% of subject populations. Citizens born after protocol implementation demonstrate no measurable stress response to cannibalistic consumption practices. For them, processed biomass represents normal nutritional sources rather than moral transgressions requiring psychological accommodation. Integrated acceptance. The clinical term describes the death of moral instinct itself, not suppression or conditioning or behavioral modification, but the complete absence of psychological frameworks that would make cannibalism emotionally disturbing. The children growing up in the hives don't need to overcome their revulsion at eating human flesh. They never developed that revulsion in the first place. Language evolution has been particularly fascinating, Dr. Voss continues, highlighting linguistic analysis reports that track changes in communication patterns across cannibalistic populations. Pre-protocol terminology related to individual human dignity has largely disappeared from common usage. Words like sacred, precious, irreplaceable when applied to individual lives have been replaced by resource management vocabulary, renewable, harvestable, optimizable. The death of dignity-based language reflects the death of dignity-based thinking. When humans are redefined as biomass resources, the conceptual frameworks that once protected individual life lose their meaning. You can't have sacred individual dignity in a system that treats individuals as agricultural products, so the language adapts to reflect the new reality. Family bonding patterns show significant modification, Dr. Voss notes, accessing psychological evaluation data from thousands of family units across the hive. Parental attachment to offspring has decreased by approximately 23% compared to pre-protocol baselines. This represents adaptive behavior. Reduced emotional investment in individual children decreases psychological trauma when those children are selected for nutritional contribution programs. Reduced emotional investment in children. Evolution in action, not biological evolution, but psychological adaptation to circumstances where loving your children too much becomes a mental health hazard. Parents who care less about their individual offspring suffer less when those offspring are processed into food. So natural selection favors reduced parental attachment in cannibalistic populations. You observe the hive's daily routine through the observation deck's enhanced viewing systems, watching millions of people go about their assigned tasks with the mechanical efficiency that characterizes all imperial populations. But now you notice subtle differences that weren't apparent before the protocol implementation. People move differently, more directly, with less casual social interaction. Conversations are shorter, more focused on practical concerns. The spontaneous expressions of joy, grief, anger, and affection that once characterized human social behavior have been significantly reduced. Emotional range compression is a consistent finding across all study populations, Dr. Voss explains, noting your observation. Citizens who participate regularly in cannibalistic consumption demonstrate flattened effect profiles compared to historical baselines. They experience less intense emotions across all categories. Less joy, less sorrow, less anger, less love. The psychological mechanisms that enable consumption of processed human biomass also limit capacity for strong emotional responses generally. Flattened effect profiles. The system hasn't just normalized cannibalism, it's created a new kind of human being with reduced capacity for the intense emotions that once defined the species. The same psychological adaptations that make it possible to eat your neighbors also make it difficult to love your children, mourn your losses, or experience the full range of human feeling. Creativity indices show corresponding decline, Dr. Voss continues, displaying analysis of artistic production, technological innovation, and cultural development across the affected populations. Citizens in cannibalistic hives produce 67% less original artistic work compared to pre-protocol levels. Scientific innovation has decreased by 34%. Cultural traditions that celebrated individual achievement or unique personal expression have largely disappeared. The death of creativity follows logically from the compression of emotional range. Art, innovation, and cultural development require the kind of intense individual passion that becomes impossible when psychological survival depends on maintaining emotional distance from your own humanity. You can't create beauty when you've learned to see people as protein sources. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery in Dr. Voss's research concerns the children, the first generation born into systematic cannibalism, who have never known any other reality. Subjects born post-protocol demonstrate fundamentally different cognitive architectures, he explains, accessing developmental psychology data that tracks mental development in children who have never experienced pre-cannibalistic moral frameworks. They process concepts of individual human value differently than historical baselines. When presented with hypothetical scenarios involving choices between individual lives and resource optimization, 97.3% consistently prioritize resource optimization without demonstrating measurable stress response. Fundamentally different cognitive architectures. The children aren't just adapting to cannibalism, they're developing completely different ways of thinking about human life and value. For them, the choice between saving an individual person and maximizing nutritional efficiency for the group isn't a moral dilemma. It's a practical calculation with an obvious correct answer. Most significantly, Dr. Voss continues, these cognitive modifications appear to be heritable through epigenetic mechanisms. Children of cannibalistic populations demonstrate reduced capacity for individual empathy even when raised in non-cannibalistic environments. The psychological adaptations are becoming embedded in the species at the genetic level. Heritable modifications, epigenetic changes, evolution accelerated through systematic trauma, creating permanent alterations in human psychology that will affect the species for generations to come. The cannibalistic protocols haven't just changed current populations, they're changing what it means to be human at the most fundamental level. You access historical records from before the protocol implementation, and the contrast is staggering. Pre-cannibalistic humans produced art that celebrated individual dignity, developed technologies driven by curiosity and wonder, created cultural traditions that emphasized the irreplaceable value of each person. They were capable of intense love, profound grief, righteous anger, and transcendent joy. The humans in the hive below you have retained intelligence, productivity, and social organization, but they've lost the emotional intensity that once drove human achievement. They're more efficient, more compliant, more psychologically stable, and less recognizably human in ways that resist easy definition. The theological implications are particularly complex, Dr. Voss notes, displaying analysis of religious belief modification in cannibalistic populations. Traditional imperial cult doctrine emphasized the sacred nature of human life blessed by the emperor. Post-protocol theology has evolved to emphasize the sacred nature of sacrifice for imperial survival, with individual life value subordinated to collective resource optimization. Sacred sacrifice for imperial survival. The imperial cult has adapted to bless systematic cannibalism, developing elaborate theological frameworks that transform murder into martyrdom and consumption into communion with imperial values. The religious institutions that once protected human dignity now sanctify its destruction in service to efficiency metrics. But perhaps most concerning from a strategic perspective, Dr. Voss continues, is the impact on military performance characteristics. Soldiers drawn from cannibalistic populations demonstrate reduced initiative, decreased creative tactical thinking, and diminished capacity for the kind of individual heroism that has historically defined imperial military excellence. Military performance degradation. The psychological changes that make cannibalistic populations easier to govern also make them less effective as soldiers. The same flattened emotional responses that enable consumption of processed human biomass also limit the passionate intensity that drives extraordinary battlefield performance. As you observe the daily functioning of the hive, you begin to notice what's absent rather than what's present. There are no spontaneous celebrations, no expressions of artistic creativity, no demonstrations of individual passion or achievement. The population moves with mechanical precision through assigned routines, but the spark of individual human spirit that once characterized the species has been systematically extinguished. The question facing imperial strategists, Dr. Voss concludes, is whether these psychological modifications represent successful adaptation to necessary survival conditions, or fundamental damage to human capabilities that threatens long-term civilizational viability. Successful adaptation or fundamental damage. The distinction matters because the cannibalistic protocols are scheduled for expansion to additional hive worlds based on their apparent success in maintaining population stability and resource efficiency. If the psychological modifications represent positive evolution, the system should be implemented across the entire Imperium. If they represent civilizational damage, the protocols should be reconsidered despite their apparent benefits. But the decision isn't being made based on these considerations. It's being made based on immediate practical benefits: increased productivity, reduced resistance to authority, enhanced psychological compliance, and improved resource allocation efficiency. The long-term consequences for human consciousness itself are considered secondary to short-term administrative advantages. You realize that you're witnessing the end of humanity as a distinct species, not through external conquest or biological transformation, but through systematic psychological modification that preserves the physical form while eliminating the essential characteristics that made humans uniquely human. The populations in the cannibalistic hives are still technically human. They retain human DNA, human physical characteristics, human intelligence, and human social organization. But they've lost the emotional intensity, creative passion, individual dignity, and moral complexity that distinguished humanity from other species throughout galactic history. In the grim darkness of the far future, you understand the greatest threat to humanity isn't extinction. It's evolution into something that survives by abandoning everything that made survival worthwhile in the first place. As you prepare to leave the observation deck, Dr. Voss offers one final observation that crystallizes the full horror of what you've witnessed. The most successful human populations in the current imperial system are those that have learned to stop being recognizably human. And from an administrative efficiency perspective, this represents optimal evolutionary adaptation to current survival conditions. Optimal evolutionary adaptation. The cannibalistic protocols haven't destroyed humanity. They've transformed it into something more suitable for survival in a universe where horror is policy and atrocity is administration. The humans who remain are better adapted to imperial civilization, more efficient as imperial resources, more reliable as imperial servants. They're just no longer human in any sense that would have been recognizable to their ancestors. And as the sun sets over Hive Primus Magnifica, artificial illumination replacing natural light in a city where natural anything has become a luxury reserved for the wealthy, you understand that you've witnessed the birth of a post-human species that calls itself human, while consuming its own children with bureaucratic efficiency. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And sometimes, the casualties of that war include the souls of entire species who discover that surviving the darkness requires becoming part of it. The Emperor protects, the faithful say. But what he protects, you now understand, may no longer be worth protecting, and the price of his protection may be the very humanity he was meant to preserve. Somewhere in the depths of the hive below, a child asks her parent why the protein rations taste different today. And the parent answers with words that contain no awareness of tragedy, no recognition of loss, no memory that there was ever a time when such questions would have broken the hearts of everyone who heard them. The child accepts the answer without further inquiry, because children born into systematic cannibalism learn early that curiosity about food sources is neither encouraged nor rewarded. And in that casual acceptance, you see the future of human consciousness, efficient, compliant, productive, and utterly devoid of the passionate intensity that once made humanity worthy of protection from the darkness of the void. The harvest is complete. What remains is no longer human, but it serves the Imperium with perfect efficiency. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that may be the best outcome that any species can hope to achieve.